Hello, hello, hello. I had to make sure I was recording there. Well, welcome. Today in this video, I'm going to show you how I turned a horrible first draft into an engaging story. Man, first drafts suck, but that's okay. I'm going to show you 3 things that I did wrong and 2 things that I did that made all the difference. And the best part about it is everyone can do these 2 things. All right, let's get into it. Alrighty, so here's what we're doing today. So I'm going to show you my first drafts and how I changed them, some of the problems that I had with this. So I had to actually type this up because my very first draft was handwritten, which there's so many problems with that, at least for me in my writing process. So anyway, so what I'm going to do is talk to you about and show you through examples. There are 3 things that I did that weren't great about my first draft, but I want you to write them anyhow. So let's get into this. This is the very first draft of what became Lies of the Demigods, and I will put a link in the chat if you want to check the book out or if you want to support me on Patreon. But this is the ugly truth of writing, okay? And I've never seen anybody show their very first draft to people. I didn't change anything as far as editing. I just typed it up from what I had. So this is the raw unedited truth. So let's read this. Vidin had chosen his stronghold well. From atop the mountain he could watch his plans unfold before him. Hidden amongst the dark evergreens covering the mountain, he surveyed his territory. He took note of every detail. He watched the people move about the military complex south of him, carrying out their assigned task, blissfully unaware. Behind the complex, he noticed the waves crashing against the outer walls of the channel, giving way to the sea. Vidin was careful to pay attention to the animals scurrying about the mountainside, trying to avoid his presence, as well as the wind brushing through the trees, giving the forest its own rhythm. Everything appeared to be in order, but he had a feeling that something was out of place. Someone was moving against him. He was sure that it was not one of those wretched hybrids on the complex, blind as they were. He had kept close watch on them. There was only one other possibility. Whoever had just set their will against his had to be one of his own kind. He was preparing to go down the mountain to investigate further when something in him tensed. That only happened when another Anakim was close. He turned just in time to grab a creature as it was forming behind him. Once he could see the eyes, he recognized it as one of his underlings. Vidin released his grip from what could have been his throat if it had need for such a thing. "What are you doing here?" Vidin asked dryly, his eyes constantly searching for others like themselves. He hated surprises. "I have news that couldn't wait," the identified being said, clearly still trying to recover from some earlier skirmish. Okay, so a little bit of background. When I wrote this, I started writing because I was an artist. I was drawing characters, and I got curious one day, found I had over 200 characters, and I was like, oh, I don't think this is normal. I don't think people just make 200 characters with names and stories and things like that. So it was all in my head and whatnot. So I decided to write a novel. That's the short version of that story. So what happened was I literally just sat down one day, put pen to paper, and this is what you're reading, right? Now, what happened was what you can tell right away from this is that I'm describing something that's very visual, and you can see that I'm seeing it, but you can't really feel what the character's feeling. The first thing that I did, first problem I had really in my first draft was the writing. The writing was a problem. There's some grammatical errors here. My style is not developed, and also my mastery of the English language and of my craft is lacking. And one of the things that you can see here is that because I was viewing my book as a movie playing in my head, that's how I tried to write it. I had this beautiful image of maybe the camera zooming in from space and kind of racing down to this mountaintop, snow-covered peaks, where you have this main evil character of Vidin with long, straight black hair, white like cloth armor that's a little dingy, right? Kind of highlighting that maybe he's not quite the hero, and he has this black sword that kind of just absorbs light. And this is before I knew anything about the black saber, but if you can think about that from Star Wars, that's kind of the image I had in my head. Anyway, so what happened was, I'm trying to write, I'm trying to share this movie that I see in my head with the reader. And there's so many issues with that. One, writing a novel, writing in period, is not the same as watching a movie, right? They're two very different mediums, and you need to learn how to master those tools in order to tell the story, to connect the reader with the story and the character in a way that's engaging. This is it's not bad, but it's not great either, right? Really, this is a little embarrassing to even put out there to show people. But what I did was I attempted to say, hey, here's this guy, he's surveying, he's in control, and something's off, right? And he's trying to figure that out. And there are better ways to have done that. There's some other issues with this as well. For instance, this whole first paragraph is really, there's nothing happening here, right? So this first paragraph, really what we're just seeing the landscape, right? So again, kind of reiterating that point. Then when we got to the second paragraph, everything appeared to be in order, but he had a feeling that something was out of place. You know, feeling is very vague, something very vague. You know, what type of feeling was he having? Was he hopeful? Was he angry? Was he anxious? Was he nervous? Was he scared? Was he livid? We don't know, because I didn't tell you, right? And something was out of place. We don't know if the something is a person. Is it, we don't know. So there's a lot of vagueness here. And then when we get down to this creature forming behind him, well, first there was another one before that. He was this second sentence there, he was sure that it was not one of those wretched hybrids, right? Now, what I mean by this is, in this particular story, what we have is a story where you have people, humans. It's not planet Earth, but think of it Earth-like. So you have humans, and then you have spirits. And the humans have both a spiritual component and a flesh component, right? So they have the stuff that we see, and then they also have the, kind of the inner soul or whatnot. And in this story, then you have the spirits that are called Anakim. Some who rebelled, some who are loyal. But anyhow, I think of like angels and demons, but I don't call them that. So anyway, this fallen Anakim does not like these hybrids, as he calls them, right? He really looks at them kind of as this bastardized combination of animal and spirit world. He doesn't like them very much. And so that's where you get this idea of the hybrids. But in this second paragraph, I don't really introduce that idea to you. I just kind of throw the word out there. And then later on, we also see that I use the word Anakim later on, but you don't really know what that is, right? You probably don't even know how to pronounce it. And so there's so many things here, right, that I was doing. And really, I think the big piece here is that I needed to be a better master of my craft. I needed to work on mastery. Now, here's the double-edged sword. There's no way to really work on mastery if you don't write, right? So first drafts suck. This was horrible. There's something else that I did here, that I attempted to do here, that you might not be able to tell just by reading this. But Vaden is the villain. And this is chapter 1. And I started with this because I read a book where it was a fantasy series like a Chosen One story, right? Except they started the book with the evil person, and it was compelling, right? By the time they got finished explaining this evil character and all that they were doing and all the stuff that was at stake, by the time you get to the little farm boy who is going to be chosen, you're like, there's no way this dude is going to be able to beat him, and the stakes are so high. You need him to win, right? But you just don't believe it, and it created such great tension that I was like, man, that's novel. I'm going to do that in my book. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to, set the stage with this really evil character right from the beginning to say, hey, guess what? This character's so evil, and he's so in control that whoever's going to fight him really, 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 really better be on their game, or else the world is doomed. And so I tried to do this, and I'm trying to set up so much in these first 2 paragraphs or so, and really not landing that well, right? So the things that I didn't do well here, there's grammatical errors, style issues, and just a lack of mastery. I had a movie in my head that I was trying to play out in person, in the writing. And then I also tried to mimic another writer, right? So we have Mastery, this movie, and then we tried to mimic somebody else, and none of that really worked out that well. So let's go now. I before I publish this, and this you can read this book. I'll put a link in the chat again, like I said, if you wanted to check it out. But I actually wrote this book about 7 times. There's 7 different drafts of this one. This next one is my 5th draft. Now this is a little bit better. This is after I realized that my first approach to my story was wrong. I tried to jump into the action and use the writing a little bit more. And what I did here was I realized also that my timeline was off. So I didn't start with Vidin on the mountain kind of pondering about this thing that was going to happen. I tried to start him with the action, right, where we fast forward a little bit to get past some of the stuff that was just boring, and I tried to jump the reader into the action. And so you'll see a bit of an improvement, but there's still some issues, and I'll point some of these out as we go. So let's read this one. This is a little bit longer section, but I needed to get this in here for one of the big errors. Vidin withdrew his sword from Gethin's back, its black blade glowing, filling the room with its aura. He watched as Gethin fell to his knees and grabbed at his chest. Having achieved his purpose, Vidin reabsorbed the sword into his body. Gethin coughed and spat blood on the floor, feeling as though he had been stabbed, although there was no one in the room and no holes in his chest. As he slumped to the floor, he wondered if Razul had been right all along. Everyone will think he died of a heart attack after his evening meal, Vidin said, addressing the 7 others like him in the room. Vidin stood about 7 feet tall in his chosen form, with layered clothes that were reminiscent of garb worn by ancient warriors. Will Nadir believe that? One of the 7 asked. Of course not. He is too clever to be fooled by such measures, but he will be powerless to do anything about it, Vidin answered. With his piercing eyes glaring from behind his long black hair, communicating his desire for conquest, he commanded their respect. The door burst open, and one of the Pharaoh came running in, hearing the thump of Gethin falling. Gethin! The elite bodyguard hollered. Regent Gethin is down, he exclaimed as he felt for life signs. I think he is dead, he finished. The other Pharaoh assigned to Gethin came running into the room, followed by the regent's assistant. Although the room was large, it struggled to hold all the people that poured in to investigate. Not one among them could see the 8 strangers gathered in the room, watching. Let us finish our business here and move on. Our enemy is sure to be en route, Vidin said. One of the Pharaoh began to take charge of the circus that was unfolding. You two, prepare Gethin for transport. You, contact Regent Alaric. He must be notified, the guard ordered. Interrupt him if necessary, he added. As the younger Pharaoh carried out his orders, Khazor studied the room. To look at Gethin, his first impulse was that Gethin had been attacked. However, there was no sign of entry that someone could have come in from, and his second command saw no one leaving as he entered the room. Alaric would not be pleased. The Pharaoh were on loan to Regent Gethin to protect him from escalating dangers. Now Gethin was dead, and he had no answers for his regent. Nadir could see the big island of Dror, Nereus off in the distance, illuminated by the moonlight. If what the messenger told him was accurate, he may already be too late. In a flash, Nadir arrived at his destination, making a straight line for Gethin's office. He passed through the outer walls as if they were air and landed where Gethin was attacked. Moments later, the messenger that had summoned him landed next to him. When Nadir landed, he found Vidin and his chosen 7 standing around Gethin's body. This was not the first time he witnessed a gathering like this. Nearly 20 years ago, Nadir was racing through the forest of Nir with his messenger Sculpin hot on his trail. Oh gosh. The worst part about this, because if you know anything about writing, or even if you're just trying to follow along, you probably got lost there, right? There are so many reasons why this is a bad draft. Now let me stop here. I had to take a sip because my mouth is getting dry. Because this is like pooing in your pants and then telling people about it. This is horrible. So anyway, this is my 5th draft, and what's the most shameful thing about this is the first version of the book that I actually published. It is no longer available, and I wish I could buy the copies that people had so we could pretend like this never happened. Okay, but here's what I did. So I had a draft, and people told me it was hard to really get into in the first couple of chapters. So I tried to add in a little bit of background towards the end of this section, you see, right? So not only are there issues throughout this section, but I also have a flashback that comes in right after this. Woo! Okay, let's talk about why this is not good. first, what is good is that we started with the action, right? We said, look, there's Vidin is stabbing somebody in his back, right? So that's good. The problem is we have way too many names here. We have Vidin, we have Gethin, we have Razul, we have Nadir, we have the Pharaoh, which are guards. We have Kazor. Where is he? He was in here somewhere. There at Kazor. We have Nadir again. You know, I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we have Dror, Nereus. These are areas, land masses. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff in this first piece that is just too much information. The reader just cannot grasp what's going on, right? And I think the biggest problem in this draft, besides the names, because that's ridiculous, besides that, is really the point of view shifts. So one of the things I was struggling with when I was doing this draft was trying to figure out how do I show kind of this pull and push between what the spirits are doing and what the people are doing. And, you know, those moments of decision or indecision where you might be influenced by somebody whispering in your ear, like, hey, you can go ahead and do this, or you can get away with that. And so I was trying to figure out how to do that, right? And this is a failure. I did not do a good job of it. But the worst part is that we start off in Vidin's point of view, right? Then we jump in the second paragraph, right? Right away, we have a point of view shift from Gethin, right? Gethin coughed. He wondered, right? And that's the last sentence there in the second paragraph is the clue that we've jumped into somebody else's point of view. And then we jump right back into Vidin's point of view in the third paragraph where it says everyone will think he died of a heart attack. That's Vidin addressing people who have not been introduced, right? Vidin said addressing the 7 others like him in the room. Well, third paragraph, you have no idea. We've only introduced 2 people. Now there are 7, 9 people in this room already. It's just third paragraph, 9 people, a point of view shift. Whew, it's a lot going on here, right? And what happened was some of this was I was addressing some of the needs that people told me about when they said, look, I just had a hard time getting into it. This is the other thing that became problematic for me. I did not have a writing community. So I knew one other person that was a writer. She was talented, had already published some books, had gone through a lot of the process, but was super busy, right? She had a job, she was also writing, married, kids, the whole thing. So I only knew one other person that could read my books that were, or even give me some advice that also wrote. And so most of my critique and feedback would come from people who were just readers. And so they were identifying the problems, and they identified them accurately. But what happened was they couldn't tell me about the problems in a way that as a writer I understood how to fix them, right? Because they would tell me, you know, here's the symptom. The symptom of your bad writing is that I can't follow along with your story until we get to a certain chapter. And so they couldn't say, hey, you got a point of view shift in second paragraph, right? Because not only are we talking about these spirits interacting with people, which is odd, right? It's not an everyday experience. We don't have that experience every day, or at all. And so that's weird in and of itself to try and describe. But then when you keep jumping from people's head to head and you don't know whose point of view you're in, you don't know who's thinking or speaking or feeling, it's just a mess. It's just a mess, right? And so there are other issues here, like some of these words like Pharaoh. Look, sometimes you nerd out, particularly if you do fantasy, science fiction, and you have all this world built around everything, and you want to share everybody with that, right? All the little intricate details, and chapter 1 is like your magnum opus, like I'm going to show you all about my world. Yeah, and this, I actually slapped a cover on it and tried to sell it. Oh my gosh, please, if you have one, send it back to me. I'll give you a new one. I will pay you for the old copies, okay? Because we need to get rid of those. All right, let's go to this last one. So this last one is the current book. This is the opening chapter in Lies of the Demigods. Now, I'll show you a little bit of things that I did to make it easier for the reader. One, every chapter that opens with a spirit opens with a little saying, right? It's like sounds like a Bible or wisdom saying. And that way it kind of cues the reader in that, hey, you're about to enter into a chapter from the Spirit's point of view. The second thing I did was I did not try to do a point of view shift with the people and the spirits in the same chapter. I would tell the spirit's point of view, and then another chapter I would tell the person's point of view. Excuse me. I didn't want to. There was no way for me to make it easy for the reader to understand what was going on in the moment. Now, this is also a symptom of me kind of having this movie in my head, because when I was thinking through the story initially, what I was thinking was that I would show kind of the adult version of the Looney Tunes, angel and demon on your shoulder, right? If you grew up when I did, you see the character who is going to do something, maybe eat some cake they weren't supposed to, or push somebody down some steps or something. I don't know. Those cartoons are kind of violent. Anyway, but while they're deciding, you'd have the good person, the little angel wings and halo, like, no, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. And then you have the little red guy, like, shut up. He kicked the little angel off the shoulder, like, go ahead and push him. Go ahead and eat that cake, right? And so I wanted to show some of that kind of struggle in the moment. And in a movie, this was so clear. I could see it in my head, right? Where you have somebody who's sitting down and they're reflecting on something, and someone's whispering in the ear, oh, if you do that, this will work. And if you do it this way, that'll work. And that's what I was holding on to when I started writing. I started trying to put this together, and it just would not work in a written form, at least not in a way that I could do it, that made it easy for the reader to jump in and get connected. So I decided I had to take a different approach. I also gave up on this idea that I needed to start with the villain. I just started with one of the heroes who's going to move the story forward, right? And there's still some issues in this book, but at the time that I finished writing it, it was the best I could do, and I think most importantly, it gives the reader a good experience. So let's look at this one and see some of the difference. It is forbidden for Anakim to harm Gamadim. Life and death are in the hands of the Creator. The passing of judgment resides with the wielder of compassion. Ancient of Days, Decree of the Divine, Second Scroll. For the first time in his long life, Nadir lacked control. The world under his protection as his guardian spirit resisted his efforts to force his will upon it. His emotions suffered the same fate. Spirits, known commonly as Anakim, held him as a champion or an enemy to avoid. After countless battles, none of which ended in defeat, he had earned the moniker Everspark. But despite a lifetime of victories, Nadir felt unprepared for the fear he faced now. Not for himself, but for those he guarded, the Gamadim, beings possessing flesh and spirit, mankind. Nadir's sand-colored skin and dark eyes glowed in the moonlight. His broad shoulders carried well the weight of responsibility that came with the rank of principality. Now 2 of his warriors floated up to meet him in the sky, passing through a cloud of dust-like lights, the remnants of enemies slain. Is everything secure on the base below? The 2 nodded in unison. Then we must hurry, Nadir said as he raced toward the chain of islands off the coast. The trio headed to the palace of Regent Gethin, their linen garments whipping through the air. The battle just won was merely a distraction. The real threat lay to the east. The 3 spirits flew over the Nerosian Ocean, cutting through any enemies that dared challenge their quest with ease. When they arrived at the palace, they shot through the outer walls like arrows slicing air, only to come across a grisly scene. They'd arrived too late. Vadin, a commander of the rebellious spirits, the Fallen, and Nadir's nemesis for the past 2 decades, was smiling as he twisted a black spirit weapon in the flesh of the regent. Nadir watched as the sword slid out of the body as his enemy reabsorbed it into his hand, to reappear sheathed and hanging from Vadin's waist. Now, this is much better, right? Because what we have here, one, we have a clue that when you start reading this chapter, that this chapter is a little different than just a regular adventure, right? We have Anakim and Gamadim and words we don't really understand. Like, what is this? What's going on? We have Ancient of Days, Decree of the Divine, the Second Scroll. You're like, oh man, this sounds cool, right? It gives it this feeling of something kind of ancient and old, right? And that's the idea. And then as far as names, we have Nadir, and then we have Vadin. Right now we have the Fallen, the Anakim, and Gamadim, but you can tell from the context that you don't have to hold on to those just yet, but I do explain them, right? So now I'm setting the stage for at least your understanding that these are spirits. We see this a number of times. One, I tell you, right? Hey, these are spirits, and they're called this. Then we see them fighting. There's instead of blood or guts or bodies, or they just disappear, their bodies kind of burst into sparks, these little lights that are all over the place. We see them passing through walls. So there's this idea, there's a sense that this is a different world, and this is a different experience that you're about to have as the reader. And you know that, okay, Nadir, they fought, and now they're racing because, even though it sounds like some amazing battle just happened, guess what? That was just a distraction. The real problem lays over here. And now we see that scene from draft 5 where we have Vadin stabbing people. We really get a chance to communicate the evilness of Vadin very quickly, right? We see him stabbing somebody and smiling. That's enough, right? Typically, that's enough. You're going to stab somebody and twist the blade to really make it painful and smile about it. Something's wrong with you, right? And so this is just an idea of, by the way, this is draft number 7. And it's also the final version of that. So this is how you can go through that. So what I did, one thing that helped me get to this point was that I also sought professional help. So after I published the 5th draft and it wasn't selling, I was like, man, I need some help. So I went to the Book Doctors, and I believe they still have a website, thebookdoctors.com. I purchased one of their books. I'll link it in the comment. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think it's The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published, and it was like their 2nd edition or something like that. Anyway, so I sought them out, got some advice, and here's what they told me. One, when they read that draft I showed you, draft number 5, when they read that, they said, okay, well, good thing you opened up with some action. That's good. Here's all the stuff that's wrong with it, right? And some of the things I showed you and talked about. And then the best advice I got from that session was that I needed to find a writing community. This was the best advice they could have given me. And the reason why this was important was because it was in the writing community that I learned the language for what my problems were, right? I was doing things like the point of view shifts, some of the grammar issues, some of the apps that I wasn't using. There are so many things that could improve my writing, but most of all, looking to the professionals, people who have published, people who are in the editing world, who do this work and help people get their books written. Getting that advice, and anybody could do that. It's free, right? A lot of this advice is free on YouTube these days. You can find it. Just look it up and go for it. But that professional help made a huge difference. And the writing community literally changed my writing, right? And you can see, let's go back just so you can see the difference, right? Listen to this first few sentences and see if you want to keep reading. Vadin had chosen his stronghold well. From atop the mountain, he could watch his plans unfold before him. Hidden amongst the dark evergreens covering the mountain, he surveyed his territory. Blah, blah, blah. Now let's go to the one over here. It is forbidden for Anakim to harm Gamadim. Life and death are in the hands of the Creator. The passing of judgment resides with the wielder of compassion. Ancient of Days, Decree of the Divine, Second Scroll. For the first time in his long life, Nadir lacked control. The world under his protection as its guardian spirit resisted his efforts to force his will upon it. His emotions suffered the same fate. Right? So, already, it's just more engaging. Right? Now, if you like fantasy, then guess what? In this last version, I've definitely give you more because you want to know. Okay, wait. There's a guardian spirit of a world, and he's a guardian spirit, but he's losing control. And what do you mean? What's happening? Right? You have questions. You want to know why. What is this decree of the divine and second scroll? Who is this Ancient of Days? There are all these things that should be tantalizing and make you want to ingest and read more. And so this is not perfect, by the way, right? Because I think at the time of recording, this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I finished this manuscript. So I've continued to improve, but it's important to remember that a lot of my issues with the writing, grammar, style, but mastery was the one that was at the top of the list when it came to my writing. The bad thing about writing mastery, becoming a master of your craft, is that there's only one way to do it, and that's to write. I've never heard anyone, I don't care if they were, how they were connected to publishing, whether it was an author, whether it was a publisher, whether it was an editor, whether somebody who was a professor, somebody who was just giving a lecture at a conference, they all say the same thing. If you want to be a writer, you must write. So first drafts suck. I mean, they suck, right? You saw that. You saw what I wrote them there. And then what's worse, I think my first draft was better than the second version, right? At least the first one, it was kind of clear. We only had one point of view. The second one, it was garbled and just disgusting. So it's all right if you write something that's not great. The point is, keep writing and don't be afraid to rewrite it. Like I rewrote this book 7 times, right? So let's do that. Now, here's the other thing I want to show you too. So this is Hemingway app. Now, this is the paid version. But let me show you. This is the first draft. And one thing I love about the Hemingway app is that it shows you with colors where some of your issues are. So one cool thing, though, even with a bad draft, which I'm ashamed of, there weren't the issues as far as the writing and some of the style aren't that they're fixable, right? You can edit them. So here, 11 adverbs meeting the goal of 11 or fewer. I always like to kind of come in a little bit under that, so I would probably take some of those out. And if you don't know what adverbs are, look that up. But basically, you want to use a great verb. You want to use a strong verb instead of something that, like blissfully unaware. There's probably another word I can use there. The other things like passive voice, which tends to be one of my issues. So surprisingly, I didn't have a lot of passive voice in these sections. And then the issues that really stood out to me were the 3 phrases that had simpler alternatives, and then 16 sentences that were hard to read. Now, all of this, if you're going to have something that's hard or a kind of a clunky sentence, you want to make sure that you're doing that on purpose. And so this wasn't on purpose. This just wasn't me knowing how to do anything about it. But on my first draft, you can see there's 2 sentences, 3 sentences or so that are kind of problematic. One that's really hard to. On the 5th draft, we see a lot of long sentences, ones that are hard to read. There's all sorts of stuff going on here. But what's interesting, even on the final draft, we still see some of those same issues. Now, here's the thing. When I finished writing this book, I wasn't using the Hemingway app, right? So I didn't have this to look at this and say, ooh, you know what, maybe I should change this a little bit or move this around. Because, for instance, like this sentence here, after countless battles, none of which ended in defeat, he'd earned the moniker Everspark, but despite a lifetime of victories, Nadir felt unprepared for the fear he faced now. And if you read that out loud, you can see, wow, yeah, maybe you want to change that. And here's the thing. You can always edit more, because if I was going to do this again today, I probably would have done something like that. After countless battles, none of which would, I would say after countless victories, because that will allow me to be a little bit, greater economy of words, after countless victories, because then I can get rid of this. And then I'll probably put Nadir here. After countless victories, Nadir had earned the moniker Everspark, right? And so all of a sudden, boom, that sentence reads so much nicer than what I read earlier. But here's the thing. I only can do this because I started using this app and realized, okay, I can change this, right? I've developed mastery, and I've continued to develop my mastery. So what you want to do is make sure that you are writing. Editing is a process that you can always do, right? But what you can't do is go back and edit something that you have never written. So I think this video has gone on long enough, but I wanted to show you some of the garbage that I wrote so you understand, look, we're in this boat together. Keep writing, because you can't get better if you don't write. And that's one of the most exciting things about my writing, is watching it develop and grow and blossom. And I'm hoping that as people ingest more of my work, that they will appreciate that as well, right? Because if you like book 1, wait till you get to book 2 and 3, right? So anyhow, that's it. So just to recap, for those who are still here, thanks for hanging out. The issues I had was, one, I was trying to mimic other authors. I was trying to do what I had seen someone else do in a book. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can really limit your ability to be you and to explore your own voice. Two, I was trying to tell the story through the lens of a movie I was playing in my head, instead of understanding how to create the impact that I wanted with the written word, right, in English. And third, I just needed to work on my writing, spelling, grammar, and mastering. And that only comes with practice and time and effort. So, all of that to say, if you're writing a piece, whether you're starting, whether you have something written, whether it's kind of written, you got notes all over the place, keep writing, right? That's the only way to get better. So, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Hope that you will take that to heart and, use it. All right. I'm going to go take a nap or go eat or something. Go do what you want to do. But go write. Take care.